Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by my European arch nemesis, a competitor, a partner, somebody we pass deals back and forth between us when we don't have, because we don't have a presence in Europe. So we send and most of our European business to Rick here. Today, I'm joined by Rick Pizzoli. Rick, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. I've been looking forward to this episode specifically because we kind of have similar businesses in different geos. And I have no interest in working on a European time zone, so I don't really see it as competitive. And I think kind of the same goes both ways. It's always fun to talk shop with somebody who's been doing it for, who's in the same business, and somebody who's been so successful at it in Europe, and somebody who's been doing it for probably twice as long as I have. So welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Now, you were Salesforce Europe, but not Salesforce Europe. 3 words, not 2. How come Uncle Mark hasn't sued you yet?
Well, we launched the company in 2002, 2003. Salesforce.com at the time was still a small SaaS company in San Francisco. They actually put the first feet on the ground about the same time, but I wasn't even aware of them. I actually grew up next door to Mark Benioff as a kid. I was aware of the name, but I thought it was a clever name, Salesforce Europe, because we're providing salespeople in Europe, Salesforces in Europe. So I thought at the time it was a clever name, and then Salesforce.com drops the .com and takes over the world as far as CRM. So certainly we get asked that question all the time, but they're clearly 2 different businesses. We use Salesforce as our CRM, but we are a sales outsourcing agency providing lead gen and sales outsourcing services. And when they've sent us a kind letter, we've responded, saying we're a great client and it's different businesses, and they pretty much have accepted that.
Did you have to call your mom and be like, hey, can you go talk to his mom? Get him.
I've thought about it. I haven't had to use that one yet, but that's always there if I need to.
That'd be the greatest. Let's not get the lawyers involved. Let's get our moms to.
Remember in 4th grade when we used to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I know you've got a great background in sales. I'm curious how you ended up in Spain in the first place, and then Spain, and then outsourcing. So can you talk to me a little bit about how that happened?
Sure. Yeah, it was an interesting route. So I was recruited out in 1996 to launch Europe for a company where I was a normal employee. I was the GM of Europe. And in that company, I hired people. So I worked with employees. I worked with sales outsourcing companies. I worked with channels. And then I did again a couple more times. So between 96 and 2003, I launched Europe for three different tech companies. And in working with sales outsourcing companies and lead generation companies, I couldn't find one really good pan-European company that was dedicated to Europe. And so in 2003, I basically founded the company that I needed as that GM of Europe, a company that provides these types of services dedicated first to US to Europe, but over time, we're pretty even Europe to Europe. Because if you're a San Francisco startup to Europe or a UK startup to Europe, you need the same kinds of services and the same kind of methodology and personnel. So we're pretty even between the both.
Super interesting. And just for context, we normally don't front load, tell me what you do in these episodes, but I think it kind of adds to the experience or adds context to your experience. So can you tell me a little bit about what Salesforce Europe does?
Sure. So in your model, you're doing a lot of predictive revenue, helping people design that sales strategy up front, design that kind of lead generation strategy. When we come in, people typically have that somewhat established in their home market. So that home market could be in the US, or their home market could be in the UK. And what we're looking to do is really replicate that success in Europe, replicate that success in new markets. And so The first job is really understanding what the go-to-market strategy is. And if they don't have one, help them define that and really document that, including what the revenue targets are and the metrics to hit those revenue targets. And then we actually provide the people and the support, the systems and the data to do lead generation, sometimes standalone, or lead generation plus inside sales, or lead generation plus enterprise or channel sales. So really depending on what that sales strategy is and the objectives are of the client, we provide those teams in the name of our clients and really build out Europe for them.
It's super interesting, and thanks for the context. The follow-up question I had is something, you mentioned you need to replicate their success in either the US or the UK and replicate that in Europe. And it sounds like you're dealing with sort of more established companies. Is that fair?
Typically scale-ups. So companies that have established in their home market. In the US, it's typically a B or C round of funding because they might use that A or B to establish themselves in the US, and then that B or C or maybe even D to launch in Europe. In Europe, it's typically an A round because maybe the seed rounds they launched in their home markets. In that A round, if it's a couple million, 5 million, whatever it is, they would typically use that to make the next step. So we don't work with just pure startups, not very often. It's typically scale-ups moving to the next market. Or it could also be, one of our biggest clients is Amazon. So Amazon bought a Wi-Fi company called Euro from San Francisco, and they wanted help targeting the telco markets in Europe. So they hired us as part of their specialized sales team to target telco in Europe for the devices, because Amazon at the time didn't have really enterprise salespeople for that particular vertical. So it can be a scale-up or it can be a division of a larger company.
And something you said earlier was replicate the success in Europe. I don't imagine everything translates perfectly. Like I've had clients where you go from one market, not even a geo, one sort of market, one industry to another, and it doesn't translate because the need isn't as strong. Can you talk to me? Like, do you have a bit of a process, or have you seen this? Like, does it always work perfectly and Rick's just the best? Or talk to me about maybe some struggles in the process that you've
never unfortunately worked perfectly. Any company has learned a lot in their home market, right? So they've made mistakes, but typically they've got a bit of processes of, okay, this is how we build the pipeline. This is what our ideal customer profile looks like. So we made some mistakes there, and it looks like the verticals we do best in are X, Y, and Z. And this is the sales team that is working for us. So maybe we have some lead generation, maybe some inside sales, or maybe some direct or some channel sales, customer success, etc. And when we look to Europe, we say, okay, what's working for you there, and what are those metrics? How many leads is a full-time lead generation person delivering? And what are the conversion rates from those leads to opportunities to deals, and what kind of revenue targets do you have? And we try to then map that out to Europe the best we can. We do some analysis on the best markets to go into, or the best verticals that we go into. We launch that, but then the product market fit in the US is definitely going to be different in Europe, and it's going to be different from the UK to Germany. So us and the client need to be very open to fine tune along the way, because you're not going to get it right the first time around. The messages, the content, the positioning. So yeah, there's a lot of fine tuning. And a mistake a lot of companies make is, hey, they have that methodology in their home market, and they just go and hire a GM in Europe or a GM or country manager and let them kind of build their own way. And that way might not be what's actually working for the client. So what we really try to do is replicate the success that they have at their home and then fine tune it along the way.
I'm Canadian, and I've spent most of my professional selling career selling to Americans. And anytime I have to pick up a deal with a Canadian, we're very similar, and I am one, so I feel like I should have an advantage. But it's definitely a different sales motion, or definitely a different conversation selling just between a Canadian and an American. I imagine in Europe, you've got quite a bit more segmentation of the markets. Like I'm curious, how does the process, how do the markets, how does selling change between each and every one? And we don't have to go through an exhaustive list by any means, because that would be hours long, I'm sure.
That's a talk on its own. Europe has 500 million people, 50 countries, but really 5 to 7 major markets that companies first look to launch in, and those are really the big economies, the big 5 plus the Nordics and the Benelux kind of make 7. Each of those countries or regions have their own nuances on how to do business. The first obvious one is what language do you sell in? So typically companies might launch because they're English friendly, whether it's a Spanish company who also speaks English, an American company speaks English, or a Canadian. Quite often they will launch in the UK, and then maybe from the UK, they will reach into maybe the Nordics or the Benelux, which are English friendly markets. But everybody has that same opportunity. So you might find that, hey, that was easy for you to launch, but you really have ultra high competition in those markets because the Spanish competitors have also launched in the UK, the US have launched in the UK. So it's important to do analysis before you launch and say, hey, maybe Germany or France or Spain or Italy are the best markets to launch in first. Do that in the local language, target the right verticals, and make sure the content is not only translated, but also the messaging is right in those particular markets. Because the UK might follow the US trend on, hey, we really want what's hot. If it's a hot technology, people are talking about it, they'll open the door. But in Germany, they care less about a hot technology. They want companies that are solid, proven references. So they might kick the tires for a year or even two before they're like, okay, I see that it's proven, not going anywhere. Let's take a chance and implement it.
I've got a follow-up. I want to ask, I was thinking about the next question and I missed the list of the five. You said there was the five.
Yes, the big five with UK, France, Germany, Spain, Italy. Those are the five big economies. And then you have Benelux and the Nordics is kind of two regions. So when companies are looking at Europe, traditionally they're looking at those seven first. And then beyond the seven, they might go to Eastern Europe. Poland's a big market, Turkey, Middle East, Africa. But it's typically those seven where we get the most demand for inbound.
And so when you're going into each of those markets, different launch team, like, is it almost like a brand new client every time, or is it the same? Is it the same team? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So when we start new with a client, we suggest start with your revenue engine first, with the lead generation and sales. Don't start with the GM first, and then your GM of what, right? So start with that revenue engine first, and put that revenue engine in the markets where you think that you're going to be successful. So those could be UK, could be France, could be Germany. Now they should be Europeans, but they don't always have to be in France. And so we have 50, 60 people in London, but it's a multinational team, and that's where we do most of our lead generation and inside sales from. So we can launch there with, let's say, a German engagement, but there could be three people in three native Germans in the London office, managed by our local sales management team. And then if we're successful there and we want to add sales management or our salespeople, so an account executive or a channel manager, we can add them to the team. That's successful. Then we can replicate that success with the French team, but also based in London. In other accounts where we're doing channel sales or enterprise sales, you need people in the market, then we'll put people in the market either on a full-time or on a half-time basis. So each of those have their subtlety and are slightly different, but they should be Europeans in Europe somewhere to be able to deliver that business.
I'd love to double click on this one. You said revenue engine first, and I think it kind of builds into the next question I was going to ask, which is, what does that perfect launch team look like for a country? So say I'm going to go into Germany. What's the first hire? What are my next? What are the success metrics? What do I see next? And then who do I hire after that? I think you kind of laid it out earlier, but I want to kind of double click on this revenue engine piece.
Yeah, it really depends who you're targeting. So if you have a company who's targeting the top 20 banks in Germany and that's it, well, you don't necessarily need a lead generation person for that because there are 20 banks, right? Well, 20 target banks in this case. So you need somebody who's an enterprise salesperson who lives in Germany, who's got experience selling whatever the platform is, security or fintech or whatever it is, as contacts in those 20 banks. So it's not an English person who's a finance guy and calling in English. It's a German person, native German, who's got those personal contacts. On the other hand, if you're targeting restaurants in Germany and it's a high volume business, well, it's less about people with personal experience because nobody knows 10,000 restaurants. It's more of an engine bringing the data, bringing the calling scripts, the content, and putting it in our Salesforce CRM with cadences and really pushing that out in volume, call, email, LinkedIn, whatever it is, to be able to address that market. Which brings up another point. GDPR in Germany is incredibly sensitive. So on your campaigns, you can't lead with email marketing because they're very strict against GDPR. So you really have to lead in Germany, calling and LinkedIn, and they use Zing, which is a German equivalent to LinkedIn. And then email is really more of a support function. So building the teams really depends on the target market, whether it's higher volume lead generation, inside sales, or mid-market, or enterprise or channel.
Gotcha. Super helpful. In terms of, there's a really interesting point you brought up when it came to who to hire. And this is a conversation I've had a number of times, and I'm curious to see where you sit on the spectrum. I think from what I've heard, there's a couple schools of thought when it comes to hiring an AE for, say, an enterprise or an SMB or mid-market account executive role. What would you say is more, or do you have a preference between somebody that has experience in industry, or let's say you've got somebody that has experience in the industry specifically that is sort of mid-level, or somebody that is maybe a higher potential rep, but no experience in the industry, but experience with the sales motion. So similar level deal size.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
Over everything here. I would say it really depends on the ACV, so the annual contract value, the complexity of the sale, and how much you need to know that particular vertical. So when I came out to Europe, I was looking for a division of Nortel, so 100-year-old Canadian company you know well, or you probably know. And so we started with a lot of telecom specialized execs, people that have been selling to Orange and Vodafone and BT and Telefonica and all the tier twos their whole life. Now that's an incredibly complex market to attack and open. A lot of stakeholders, a lot of personal, different people that are moving around that you have to know. Selling into that market from the outside is almost impossible. I mean, you really need local experts. So the people that we have on the team are 50 years old, 60 years old. They've been selling that market their entire life, and they know everybody in their home market. So even though I've been in that space, more generalist in Europe, I can never kind of outsell a Spaniard focusing on Spain. So I think it really depends on the complexity of the target account, whether it's, let's say, telco or banking, or let's say channels. We do a lot of retail tech. And so that's targeting, let's say, the big retailers. Those are also big, complex companies. And there might only be 10 or 20 per country. And so you really need to know the people if you plan to be able to close 5, 10, 50% of them to be able to push that business forward. If you don't, if you're just a great salesperson and you're calling into them and you don't know the people, it's going to be a little bit harder. Now, if you're talking about more of a mid-level, let's say a SaaS solution is maybe 20,000 to 50,000 a year, where it's got some decent brand awareness or maybe beginning brand awareness and some good sales methodology, great. You can put somebody maybe 5 years of experience who's got some proven SaaS sales experience, train them really well, give them good data, do good lead generation, maybe support them by a good lead generation engine, and really good tools to be able to take those kind of first sales qualified leads to opportunities to close deals. And that can be successful on more of a volume business. So they might be getting 2 or 3 leads a week, 5 leads a week, and processing those. Or the telco salespeople, they'd be out of their game, that many leads and processing that much business. It's just kind of not their scope. So it really depends, I think, on the volume of business, the size of the deals, the complexity of the deals.
100%. Okay, very interesting. And this is one of those questions where there really is no right or wrong answer. It's the consultant answer. It depends.
It depends. People say, what country should we sell in? And you say, it depends. I mean, there's no magic wand on where you should start. And so, but it depends on who they are. But, after maybe a half an hour call with a client, it's pretty clear on what type of team they should build. So it's not a mystery when we have those calls. It's pretty clear depending on who they're targeting, who their clients are in their home market. For example, if you're selling to, let's say the telco example, if you're selling to tier 2 telcos in the US, because you have something that's very innovative that the up and comers want to beat the big guys, whereas the big guys, you fail because they're typically developing it on their own. If you're coming to Europe, follow that same strategy. Don't come to Europe and say, okay, I want Vodafone, I want BT, I want Orange, because you're failed. That was not successful in the US. And so replicate your success in the US here in Europe. And so define who those tier twos are, what countries are they in? Are there tier twos? Because like in France, there aren't any tier twos. They've all been bought and eaten by the tier ones. So do a bit of an analysis of the potential market in those countries, and then build a team around that target vertical. So it's not only just it's the marketing messages, but also the team in the right country, and then attack those verticals.
Love it. It brought up an interesting point that you mentioned, and I keep coming back to replicate success.
Yeah.
From a tactical perspective, how much research are you doing into, say a company's coming from the UK into Spain?
Yeah.
You say we want to sell in Spain. How much you're going to replicate the success? How much research are you doing into the companies and their target account lists in the UK before you go out and start building that list? Like, what is that? Talk to me about what that process looks like for you.
So we have an onboarding process that we do with every client, and that is a number of onboarding documents. One of them is just purely dedicated on understanding the ideal customer profile. So they'll complete the document. We'll spend a lot of time walking them through it, talking about the different accounts, so we can build that list well. And then we understand what their USPs are, their positioning, and then we use a number of third-party data sources and LinkedIn Sales Navigator to build out that list. We share it with the client. We sanitize it to make sure it's real, and we engage. That's what we do for every engagement. We can also add another level of kind of sales analysis. We can do more of a detailed market analysis that the clients want, really understanding who the competition is, who the competition is selling to, do they have people in the local country, what their positioning is different from yours. Because they're there and they're established, does that mean we should change that focus market a little bit? Either size of companies go up market or go down market, they have different verticals. We can also do more analysis on the client's customers. So just not taking their word for it, but actually interview their salespeople, interview their clients, interview the lost clients, and really understand to make sure that really what we're replicating is best possible case.
You mean you don't just take a client's word for, oh yeah, these are my best clients? And
I mean, we do some fairly detailed analysis in that first kind of playbook we do with our clients. Many clients, by the time they want to start selling tomorrow, right? And they only have so much time to give you part of that analysis process. And so we take as much time from the clients as they can give us during that time. If they want to do more analysis in more time, we have plans for that. But typically, clients want to start, and probably one of the challenges is a lack of planning, right? Clients probably should do more planning, do more analysis. What markets should they go to? What target verticals? Better planning overall, but we don't always have that luxury.
Of course, and planning, and not just the level of detail, but also the timing of it takes a period of time to penetrate a market to get sort of any type of meaningful result. And so planning for that sort of ramp period, a year out, 6 months out.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious
People
when you're
forget.
coaching if somebody's a VP of sales sitting on this call and they're listening, and you were saying, like, regardless of whether they're going to outsource with you or not, what would you say, if they're plugging you into the 2023 forecast, which we're probably all doing right now, what kind of timing around results should somebody like that plan for? Like, is it 1 quarter and then you're instantly profitable, producing millions of dollars in revenue? Is it 8 quarters to get that really strong ROI, somewhere in between? I'm sure it's going to depend. So I'd love to understand how you think about that.
Yeah, it depends. But I mean, if we were to sign today, October 25th, it takes really a minimum of a month to onboard a client, go through all that onboarding process, understand their ideal customer profile, their USPs, build that data. So that's all kind of our operations team working with the operations team, the sales management, the CEO, the CFO of the client. And then in parallel, we're building our team. So if a client wants 3 full-time German BDRs, we don't always have 3 full-time German BDRs sitting, waiting for that project to start. So quite often we'll have to either, if some accounts projects are ending, take somebody off an account that has ended, or bring new people in. So there's that resourcing part of the engagement. Typically, we do provide full-time dedicated people. We can also do half-time. So that's a process of kind of onboarding the client, training the sales team, and engaging that market. So minimum 1 month, preferred if you have luxury 2 months. So let's say if we were to sign today, nobody wants to launch in December because of the holidays. So let's say we sign today and maybe do some planning November, December, really launch the effort, early January. It's typically 3 months of kind of pipeline build. So, the first month might be 2 leads, next month might be 4 leads, next month there'd be 5 or 8 leads until you kind of get a run rate of an enterprise of account of maybe 8 leads per month. So that typically takes 3 or 4 months to kind of get up. And then you have your sales cycle. And, any company will have their sales cycle. It could be 1 month for, a quick sale, or it could be 6 months for more of an enterprise sale. So that also runs. Companies often forget how long that's taken in their home market, because maybe they've launched their home market 3 or 4 years later. They're quite successful. They've got an engine, and they think, well, now we can just turn it on, and sales cycle's 3 months. Well, it might be sales cycle 3 months for you now in the US, that you have the brand, the processes, and the people, and the lead, but you're starting brand new in new markets. So they don't know who you are. They don't know your brand. You don't have a pipeline. So it's typically, simple as kind of 1 quarter for the lead generation. And then typically it's that second quarter and the third quarter when the revenue starts coming in.
It's yeah, I've sat down on the other side of that conversation a number of times as well. And the realization that just because you had success in your home market with a particular channel, like we deal a lot in the US, and we'll have a company that comes to us and they'll say, hey, we're really successful with inbound. Can we go and do outbound? And like, even that can take, it's you're trying to figure out, because inbound, everybody's like, nobody's qualified, but everybody's is motivated. With outbound, you have to take those like signals from inbound and look at who's qualified, and then try and translate into a target account list, and then kind of work through that network. And I think one of the kind of a similar vein, one of the things that I've seen people struggle to come in contact with the reality of is that outbound does take longer than inbound. I'm wondering how you handle that, or what your process looks like, because obviously you're not sitting there building a theoretical engine for somebody who wants to sell telecom in Germany. So you don't have a huge amount of inbound. This is all cold outbound that you have to hire somebody, build a strategy.
Inbound is non-existent because the brand is not known. I mean, if it's known in the US and they've had some inbound because they've had some good PR, and so maybe that's possible, but that's a luxury. Typically our clients are not known, and it's pretty kind of fresh. But even inbound takes time. I mean, if you're starting to do your digital marketing in Europe and you're investing in Google, SEO and paid ads and stuff, that still takes 6 months to kind of ramp up. And that digital inbound needs to go hand in hand with your outbound. So if we're pushing outbound content, we're calling, we're emailing, we're LinkedIn. Somebody says, I've never heard of this company. Who are they? They do a Google search, and they see them popping up in Google AdWords. They see them coming up in just organic search. It lowers the risk factor. Like, oh, these guys are real. I'm surprised I haven't heard of them before, because they actually presenting me some pretty interesting content that is fixing a need for that I have. And I see that they're out there. I'll take the call. Versus they receive that content, they search, they don't see you anywhere. They think, okay, I do have a need, but I don't know who these guys are. They're not in the top 5. I'm not going to, waste my time. So I think that inbound and outbound kind of go hand in hand. I think they both probably take, at least in Europe, kind of 6 months to really kind of see fruition. I would say outbound probably starts seeing real results first, unless, there's, again, they have good brand awareness and they've already been receiving some inbound leads.
Mm-hmm. And I think to your point earlier, if you're selling to a company and they don't know any of your references and they're all in a different geo, I think there's definitely going to be some hesitancy. How do you approach that? Are you trying to build off of will you look for a case study? Will you try and get them to build a case study? If they don't, let's say they're going from the example, UK to Spain.
Yeah.
Let's say they have zero case studies with Spanish companies. How much of a home field advantage is it to have a case study in the geo that you're going after? Is it a pre-requirement? Is it super helpful? Is it no impact at all?
I mean, US to Europe, having that first account is more important probably than, let's say, UK to Spain. So if you have a UK company and they've got proven references in the UK, and let's say they're in the banking space, and banking in the UK is advanced. Spanish banking is also quite advanced, but they'll look to those UK references and they'll say, okay, these guys get it. They've done some pretty good things. You might not get the biggest Spanish banks to start with. You might need to go for kind of a middle, maybe more forward-thinking Spanish bank that wants to lead from a technical perspective, because they need to do things that are better. So it's also about picking that target market. So you can spend a lot of time with the BBVAs and the Santanderes, and they can take a year just kind of kicking the tires. And if they can develop their own internally, they probably will. Or you go to the kind of mid markets where they don't have that internal development team. They want to be more competitive against the big guys. They look to who's being innovative in the UK and they'll move faster. So I think that's important. If you're going to a market like Germany, and maybe where localization is really important, then yes, I think having that first reference client is critical. And you might have to do a special deal with that first client. Some of those, they might want to be known as the innovator in the local market. So you do a special deal, whether it's pricing or support, and then they're really kind of involved in giving you references and talking to people, because that's kind of then them bragging a bit about how they were the innovator bringing this new technology to market. But if they're going to do that, you need to make sure that it's a perfect fit, that it's going to work well, that it's all the value set is there, and it's just not a favor.
Super interesting. You mentioned Germany. I'm curious, for the 7 major regions that you mentioned earlier, are there ones that are particularly home field advantage centric? Like you have to have a case study in Germany in order to sell into them, or it's much harder to without that local case study?
Yeah, I would say Germany is it's the most potential. It's the biggest economy in Europe, has the most potential. But it's the hardest market to crack. It's the hardest market to crack because you need to speak German in most cases. GDPR is quite strict, and they do like local references. But again, if you've got a really good reference in another market, in the UK or France, and you're a known US company or you're a known European company, it makes it a bit easier. But yeah, generally Germany is the hardest market to crack out of all the European markets, but it has the most potential. It's also probably the most demand that we have today. I think maybe following Brexit, people are like, well, UK always been in the go-to, but now because of Brexit, let's see who's out there. So we get a lot of demand for market entry strategies into the German market. And we have a lot of really interesting German scale-ups that we're working with today, taking into Europe. So there's some really exciting companies coming out of Germany. Berlin, for example, Berlin, for example, within Germany has been a really kind of super spot for techs. And it's one of the reasons also it's an English first environment. So it's a very highly international market. So they have people from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the US, and quite often it's kind of an English first environment within the organizations. So they can really attract best talent.
Super interesting. I was going to say, I know you have 3 kids and it's impossible to pick your favorite. You've got 7 markets that you sell to. Maybe it's a little bit easier. Do you have a favorite, just a personal favorite that you would prefer building a team for, or that's your go-to if your buddy tapped you on the shoulder over beers and said, hey, I want to?
It depends. I mean, if it's a marketing tech company, for example, UK really needs a marketing tech. And there's a lot of European HQs that are sitting in London for a lot of big European or American companies that are managing the marketing tech spend for Europe. So, on that if you're not there in the UK, it's going to be hard because that's really where a lot of those decisions are made. But other technologies, I mean, it just depends on the competitive field. The Nordics is a great market to crack. It's easier to get meetings. It's smaller, so it's going to make less of a dent in your revenue targets. but sometimes it's easier to progress opportunities and kind of prove the European market before you expand it into other markets. UK can be great, English friendly, lots of competition. And then really the next four, as we said, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, really depending on what the product is. We get asked that every day, and I wish it was an easier answer, but it really depends on the company.
That's fair. I knew there was no right or wrong answer. I was just really curious to see your perspective of like, where's your, the UK's good.
It just depends. I mean, for example, in Italy, it's easier to get meetings. Italians like to talk, right? So you could say, hey, lead generation campaign, 10 SQLs a month, 12 SQLs a month. It's easier to engage. Where in Germany, it's the more standoffish. It's also harder to get to the right person because you're not supposed to email. You're supposed to call to the front desk. The front desk won't pass you to the person. Or maybe, from the front desk, they can't. People are working remote. They don't know how to transfer you, and they won't give the mobile number out. So sometimes it's just harder to get to people in Germany. But once you do, the conversion numbers are typically better from SQL to opportunity to deal. Whereas in Italy, you can get those calls, but you need to make sure they're qualified and worth your while because the conversion numbers aren't always as good as in other markets.
What's your experience with France in terms of where do they sit on that spectrum?
Probably mid-market. I mean, you need to have French. Always in France, you need to have French people. I think, a lot of these markets, you need to be extra focused on a particular vertical. So if you're going into French e-commerce, if you're going to French marketing, and you have a good proposition, and you're reaching out with somebody who's got, let's say, common LinkedIn contacts, then they're going to be more open to open the door and speak with you. But France can be a more complicated market. Tends to be less competition because it's very complex to hire and fire in France. Maybe they're they're famous for that and quite expensive. So if you're paying somebody €100,000 salary, the kind of loaded labor rate cost could be 200,000. I mean, there's just a lot of social costs and everything that go into that, and it's very hard to, it's hard to find that person, to hire that person. It's also hard to let that person go. So we get a lot of demand for our services for the French market because of that.
And how about Spain?
Spain, it's generally easier to get meetings. I would say easier than in Germany. In Spain are also open to talk. They're open to learn about new technology if your positioning is clear. It might be more a bit about efficiencies, cost savings. Whereas Germany is more about reliability and quality. So the messaging might be slightly different. But we like the Spanish markets, and I mean I live here, so it's a home market for me. But I don't want to be biased and pushing people towards so it's one market or another. It really depends on kind of their sweet spot and which vertical that they're selling into.
I think we found your secret favorite. I won't tell your other kids. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And then you said there was Baltics and Nordics. So what does it look like going into the Baltics? Well,
more the Nordics than the Baltics. So the Nordics, you have Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, kind of a common culture. Of course, there's differences. Don't tell the Finns and the Swedish, they have a common culture, very, very different languages. But we often support them by a single team, maybe somebody in Finland or somebody in Sweden. Maybe they're speaking a local language, maybe they're doing it in English, but the English is excellent. So we find that the Nordics, they're very open to new technology. They're open to kind of cutting edge technology. So they're willing to take a risk on new technology. They're very open, and when it comes to the dialogue, I mean, if they don't like something, they'll tell you. They're very pragmatic about it. They're very honest in the whole process all the way through. If they like something, they'll tell you. If they want to progress on an opportunity, they'll tell you. If they don't, they will typically tell you, which is quite nice. Whereas other markets, maybe let's say Southern Europe, they tend to be a little bit more conflict avoidance. So if they don't like it, you might not really tell unless you're a local person, and you can kind of get some of those nuances. So it's the nice things about the Nordics is they're quite open on feedback about your approach, and that allows you to kind of address concerns that they might have.
Super interesting. Before we move on, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on sort of the different regions and differences between them. Is there anything else I've missed? Sort of asking questions about the sort of differences in between the regions. Anything I should have asked?
Yeah, I think, having local language we talked about is important. Having local planning in these different markets is important. Having good local data in all these markets is really important. Having an awareness of GDPR and what you can do as far as your outbound. I mean, there's a lot of kind of lead generation tools that say, oh, I've got this great LinkedIn AI chatbot that can just push out the perfect messages and get people. Well, LinkedIn alone, I get thousands of LinkedIn messages. It is not going to move the needle when it comes to lead generation. Or, high volume emailing, it's illegal and you could be fined millions, literally millions of dollars if you do it wrong in the wrong market. So, having an understanding of all that is quite important. So, I think just good planning, good market planning, understanding your target vertical, understanding where your competition is, getting the data right, the messaging right. I mean, all that's a lot, and all that kind of falls into a go-to-market plan. It's nothing that we can talk about. It's just good planning, and all that needs to go into a good plan to be kind of then delivered.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that was kind of the direction of my next where we were going to go. What does good planning look like?
Well, I would say that probably the first mistake that we have with people is the lack of a plan. Everybody wants to talk about their ambitions in Europe. And so people will reach out to us and they say, we want to open Europe. I say, great, send me your plan. Let me review it. And let's set up a call for tomorrow, for next week. We'll just talk about it. Okay. So we get the call, we talk about it, and they talk about what they're doing in the home market, who they like to sell to. So we say, well, great. Do you have a revenue target? Well, maybe, maybe not. Do you have some metrics you can show from your home market? Maybe, maybe not. I would say less than 10% really have and maybe they need to understand who I am, of course, before they're ready to show a confidential plan. Mm-hmm. But let's say we get through that. Okay, yes, we're a leading provider. We could be a partner for you. Show me the plan. Few people have it. And that's hard because, you could say, okay, they say, how much does a team cost? Well, what are you trying to deliver? Oh, you want to deliver €1 million next year. Okay. What is your annual contract value? Well, it can change. Well, give me a number to play with. Okay. It's 50,000. Okay. So if it's 50,000 and you have $1 million target, you probably need a pipeline of 4 million, maybe a 4-to-1 close ratio, or 3 million. And how do I get to then 3 million in opportunities? I need probably another 3-to-1 leads, right? From lead to opportunity. So that's 250 leads over a course of a year to be able to get to $1 million in revenue. So how am I going to get you 250 leads? If, what are your SDRs producing in your home market? If they're producing 10 a month, then I'm going to need probably 2.5, 3 SDRs to deliver on your $1 million revenue target. But if you said, how much does it cost to build out Europe? And I said, well, here's the cost of one person. Okay, let's do it. That one person is not going to deliver that 1 million target. So, you need to be clear on what the revenue target is. Here is the team that you need to be able to deliver that. We can spread that team across 2 or 3 different countries, decide who's going to close that business. Maybe it's the same person, maybe they're doing lead generation and inside sales, or maybe you also need an English speaking or a local language speaker to be able to close that business. So that's all the planning. That's part of the planning that we request from our clients.
I love that. Because it's how long is a piece of string kind of question. I want just tell me how much one rep is. It's like, well, one rep is not going to get you that if you want $1 million. Yeah. We get similar questions like, oh, we can just hire a single SDR, right? It's like, well, you can, but they're not going to produce $1 million in revenue or in pipeline on their own, let alone on their own in the first year.
And a single SDR sitting at the company site or sitting on their own in Europe, they don't have the data, they don't have the technology stack, they don't have the local sales management. If they get it wrong, who's going to replace them? So who's going to hire them to begin with? Who's going to mentor them? So there's a lot of, from our cost, half our cost is the BDR, half the cost is the data and the technology and the support team to be able to really hit that consistent, let's say 8, 10, 12 sales qualified leads per month that then sales can then convert. So yeah, there's a cost there and there's real clear metrics. we work a lot with just a very simple ROI tool with our clients and saying, what's your budget? Is it 10,000 a month? Is it 20,000 a month? How do we mix it between sales and lead generation? How many activities per day is the lead generation person going to be doing? What are the metrics following on? This is the revenue. Well, we need more revenue. Well, great. So we either need more lead generation or more sales, or we need to improve these metrics. But let's not be unrealistic on the metrics and give people expected KPIs that they're not going to hit, because if they're salespeople and they want commissions from those sales, and they're not seeing those commissions in 6 months, they're going to move on, because they can go to a Salesforce who's got proven pipeline, proven deals, good packages and good commissions, and proven pipeline of revenue and clients and prospects coming in.
I'm curious. I wonder, kind of building on what you mentioned earlier about, it's a team approach and it's not just you've got to do the plan first. One thing that we've often run into is, say, I think one of the worst time zones. I mean, I think Siberia to Vancouver, exactly 12 hours. We had a developer there once. It was the worst time zone. One of the
Where in
most
Siberia? There's also East and West Siberia.
that's true. I can't
Probably
remember.
7 time zones in Siberia itself.
Exactly. It was like dead central. It was exactly 12 hours. So that was the most impossible time to meet, because 7 a.m., 7 p.m. And anyway, we get a lot of companies coming from Europe, coming from Australia, and they have local AEs and they want to sell into the US market. I imagine, so question one, do you see a similar trend of American companies wanting to use their American AEs in the European market, if, say, they just want to start with an SDR, or they just want to start with that lead gen or revenue engine? And then two, what's your perspective on how much of a time zone difference would you say is acceptable, or is it less about the time zone and more about the language?
Yeah, I would say it's more about the language, and it's more about the cultural fit, and it's more about the commitment to Europe. So there's always competition. And if we have, let's say, a native English BDR who has a lead for a marketing company in the UK, and then an American salesperson comes in, the company immediately notices, it's a US number, it's a US accent. Okay, are you in Europe or not? Well, I have a lead generation person, but not a salesperson. So they're going to think, what's the commitment to Europe? Do they understand the subtleties of Europe? Do they understand the currency, the regulation, GDPR, all these, the risk factor all of a sudden goes up. Would you have customers here yet? And if there's 2 or 3 other competitors that have a team and an office in the UK, you need to be a multitude better than these other companies if you're going to win that business. Because again, everything is competitive. But if you put a salesperson in Europe, even if they're selling in France or Germany, at least they're an English speaker, and a native English speaker, at least they're in Europe. That makes a big difference on showing, okay, at least we've made some commitment to Europe. We have somebody in Europe. They might not be speaking German, but at least we have somebody in Europe. So it's less, I think, of the time zone, which also has an impact. It's just more of the cultural sensitivities and being able to get the understanding the buying behavior of the customer. Does he like what he's talking about? Am I talking too much? Am I not? Am I asking enough questions? How do we progress this? And then the perceived risk factor of, is this company committed to Europe or not?
I love that, de-risking the sales process for the customer, or the buying process for the customer. Because you're totally right. It shows if I'm on the other line and English SDR hands me off to an American AE on a different time zone, it's very clear that they just got up, or they're staying late, or whatever it is. Do I want to buy from this company? Then I'm then going to have to go through integrations, with the software stack, and your whole team's on a different time zone. My customer success rep is going to be on a different time zone. There's no local understanding of, like you said, the rules and regulations. I think that's such a interesting and understated point that I think a lot of people miss.
And think of it the other way around. When's the last time, as a North American company, that somebody was selling to you from France? Okay, they speak fluent English, with French accent, but they're selling you this really cool SaaS platform from France. You're going to say, what's your plan for the US? What's the support plan for the US? Who do you have here? So it just doesn't happen that often. American buyers think, wow, everybody, they should be here. And American sellers think, wow, we're an American company. People would want to buy from us. No, but Europeans, it's a big continent. And, they're going to prefer to buy from somebody local. It can be not a problem being an American company. American companies are highly valued, but you need to show your commitment.
I love that. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk shop with you if we can. We both run sort of somewhat similar sales outsourcing businesses. I'm curious, what's been the biggest challenge? What's been the most frustrating part of building a sales outsourcing business where you're outsourcing sales on behalf of other companies?
Sure. I mean, predictable revenue probably started with the book and then led, I'm not sure what it was, the chicken and the egg, but you really founded the business on lead generation. And that's fantastic. We really founded the business on more enterprise sales. So 20 years ago, we were doing, high level enterprise sales into telco, into banking. And then kind of 10, 15 years ago, SaaS became much more prevalent, bigger SaaS deals. So you still had enterprise sales people going after the bigger deals. But then 10 years ago, SaaS really went mid-market, where you were needing a higher volume of 10, 50, 100,000 ACV value deals. And you couldn't rely on just a well-connected salesperson. You really need to have a solid lead generation engine. So we started putting callers on the teams. We had a Spanish caller, Italian caller, and that still wasn't enough. I mean, we really needed to get to where you are with that lead generation 2.0. We spent over $250,000 in our tech stack, in our data, sales management, the operations team. So the hardest thing for us was really coming up to speed and being a world-class lead generation team. So we could get that lead generation business, either standalone or feed our own inside sales and enterprise salespeople with high volume, consistent, predictable revenue that they needed. So for us, the hardest part was really to crack and be that professional lead generation team, because it's really hard, and it's hard for companies to do it on their own, and it's hard for people to kind of break into our space and do that right.
You're totally right. It definitely is like the hardest part of sales. And I do look in the mirror and go, like, you idiot sometimes, for like, this is the only thing that we specialize in, which is the hardest part. I'm like, why? I grew up as an AE closing deals, carrying a bag, and then Aaron and I came together. And you're right, the book did well. Aaron working at Salesforce came first, then he wrote the book, and then I think he might have been doing some consulting, before the book came out, and then he was kind of reluctantly pulled into that sort of sales leader. Like, he really liked being the author role, being like writing books and lots of big ideas, and like that's where he really wanted to spend his time. And so that's how we kind of ended up coming together. But it is definitely I do think sometimes, oh man, prospecting is the hardest part. Why don't we do it just a little bit more? But then again, like, it's the hardest part, so it requires all of our focus.
Yeah, it's a hard part. There's a lot of innovative tools to support our business, but they don't replace the business. And so there's always a new tool that's out there that's going to do. You don't need to call anymore. You don't need to email. You don't need. But at the end of the day, it's still a highly person-to-person business. It's multi-channel. It needs to be well thought through. It needs to be well focused to be successful. And then it also then needs to tie well into the next phase. It needs to tie well into that inside sales phase or that enterprise sales phase. And those messages that you start on the lead generation side, they need to coincide with all the way through to the sales side. Because if you're doing the wrong messages and you're getting the wrong kind of leads, or setting the wrong kinds of expectations, you might consistently be losing those deals to the competition because you didn't set the stage right, or you didn't get the right kind of leads up front. So a success at the AE level really is determined on success at the lead generation level, just not in volume, but the right kind of leads and positioning those leads accordingly, so that sales process really starts at the lead gen all the way through to qualification, through to sales.
I think exactly what you said is one of the things that I think a lot of companies get wrong when they think about not just outsourcing, but I think outbound or top of funnel lead gen in the first place, is that the two are connected very, very closely. It's not a toss it over the fence and an AE can do whatever you can as long as you open the door. The initial email the initial conversation, that first cold call sets the tone, sets the context, sets the reason why the prospect's having that conversation in the first place. And it's really hard to, once you've set that first impression, or you set them on this track in the buyer's mind, it's really hard for an AE to come in and change that track. And so if you're selling, and you're selling, I don't know, a solution that saves, they could either save money, or increase revenue. If you start with the saving money conversation, it's very hard to jump to, okay, well, why don't we talk about this? And the buyer's like, well, no, I wanted to have this conversation. This is why I got on the phone. And it's never just as clear as that. There's a lot more nuance to it. But I think looking at the two of them as a connected entity is one of the biggest mistakes that I think many revenue teams are making when they're looking at outbound and saying, hey, it's not working. I wonder why that could be.
Yeah. We have accounts where we've generated a massive amount of leads, but the leads aren't closing. And why is that? So, really it's important to do that analysis of why, at what stage are they falling out of the, why isn't it going kind of 3-to-1, 4-to-1 lead to opportunity and opportunity to deal? So where in that process are they following out? And the ones that are closing, is there commonality? Are they in particular verticals? Is it the size of the company? Is it the profile of the person that we're targeting? So consistently learning. And then when we're dealing with the client needs to have the time to be able to take our feedback and help adapt those messaging, because, we can fine tune the messaging, but we're not inventing the message for the client. We're taking that message, we're adapting it, but it still needs to be approved by the client. So clients always need to have time and the awareness to be able to, and the trust, to be able to fine tune that message and fine tune the, let's say, the target verticals, depending on the market feedback that we have in the market. And, that could be days into the weeks into the engagement. It doesn't have to wait, for a 6-month review to find out, okay, we're going to pivot from here to there. There's small fine tuning steps along the way.
100%. I'm curious, kind of going back to the, tools of the trade here. What was the biggest aha moment of building the outsourcing business?
I think getting your focus right, we talked about a couple of times, really understanding the home market, who is your absolute best customers. And let's say you've got 20 customers in your home market and you've got 10 in media and 5 in banking and 3, whatever, find those 10 and then the size of those 10 and then the buyer persona in those 10. And then look at the European market and say, where can I find those people in the highest volume that I can be competitive? And then build your whole sales and marketing strategy, your digital marketing around that, your outbound lead generation, your sales team. So hire the salespeople who know that market, push out your content with references in that market, because you try to sell to everybody, you sell to nobody. You have a lot of generalist references, people aren't going to relate to them. So people sometimes say, well, listen, I don't want to be too focused because I don't want to miss out on an opportunity. Well, if an opportunity comes from a different space and you think you can address it, address it. But we're saying they're really the targeted. So when we've had like the most successful engagements, we had a really successful engagement with a company called Livefire from San Francisco, who really invented the space around newspaper magazines and magazine social interaction with their user base. Now, brands were also looking at that. How do I interact with my user base? But Livefire really did it well around newspaper magazines and newspapers. So we built a team that was exclusively, for the first 2 years, only looking at that space. And we just dominated that space. We got there first. We closed Time Out Magazine in 3 months from start, Financial Times, Sun. So some really big titles, first in the UK and then across Europe. We grew that from 0 to 10 million in 3 years. We did some really high-level partnerships with people like Adobe and Salesforce. In the end, they sold out to Adobe. So Adobe bought them because they really liked the tech. Adobe then looked at our team. We had 10 full-time people, 4 commercial people, 6 support, lead generation, and sales engineering. Adobe didn't need those people because they were replicated inside Adobe, but they did like the commercial people. So they tested our 4 commercial people for 4 months. They liked them all. They paid us a recruitment fee, and they brought them over into as Adobe employees. So, looking back at that, why were we successful? Because we only focused on one vertical across Europe for the first 2 years.
I love that. And that sort of maniacal single focus on a particular market is what got you there. I'm super curious. You mentioned something there about, selling your people. This is it's sort of like if you're a woodworker, you get to enjoy your tools. And then a customer's like, hey, I really like that kitchen or that chair you built for me. Can I buy the machine that made it? This has always been a conversation that's like, it's a challenge. It's a challenging one. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you will then help your people find that sort of next step with one of your customers. Can you talk to me about how you think about that? And is that a common thing with your company?
It typically happens when a company's had an exit. It doesn't happen too often for a company scaling. So Livefire, they had no international employees. They had no international entities. We ran 3 years, all the contracts on American contracts without any European contracts. And so it was quite, for them, quite efficient. No local taxes to deal with, no local legal to deal with. We had a UK office opening with no office. We did it in a third-party venue. We had Time Out magazine, our first clients there. We had the press there. It was a really exciting event, but there was no real office. It was just, it was the opening. And so I forget actually the original question for.
Oh, just about selling when it comes to having clients buy their people.
Oh, yes. And so they had the exit to Adobe, and then Adobe, in that case, they wanted the commercial team. So that's typically when it happens. Sometimes people will say, listen, I want your lead generation person. We're really bonding well. Okay, you can have them, but on their own, they don't have the support and the data and everything that we're providing them. So we typically allow it after a year of engagement. And typically it happens once there's an exit because kind of the value add that our team provides.
Love it. It is kind of, we have this conversation all the time. And I think every net new customer that looks at our outbound team, they'll go, well, we eventually want to own this person.
Yeah.
But to your point, it is sort of like buying Tony Stark without his suit, without the Iron Man suit. There is so much that goes into it that I think is an underappreciated asset of the underappreciated side of the work that you do to create the list, to make it clean, to make sure that there's always enough prospects in sequence, to make sure that the rep has a great tool that they're trained on and all the systems and process and everything's documented so that you're not missing anything. Like that's people look at that, they go, oh, it's just a couple of Salesforce dashboards and reports.
Yeah, there's a lot more to that, and then building the team and managing the team, and then networking capabilities. But I understand that a lot of companies, and also if they're kind of saying, how do I get into Europe? Do I hire my team? Do I open up an entity? Do I work with like a globalization partners and do employment of record company, or do I work with a third party? The third party concept, if they can kind of see it as a build, run, and transfer, because hey, I do want to have my own team. But these guys can get me there faster with the local hand-holding, but I can still have that team, my own team in 3 years, great. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, and we don't want to prevent that. If that team has 10 people, fully dedicated, local management, lead generation is working, sales engineering, and they can take a team package, why not? It's we've been successful. It's a nice exit for us because they pay us recruitment fees. That team is up and running, and in that case, it's probably. It's going to work. In the case of Adobe, they didn't need the support, but they needed the commercial people. And those commercial people were delivering 1 to 3 million each a year consistently. So for Adobe, they got 4 well-trained guys with a huge pipeline that were delivering deals from day one.
That sounds like a pretty good deal for them.
Yeah, good deal for them. It was a good deal for us. It's a nice case study. So
that's fantastic. Rick, I know it's getting late on your side of the pond here, and I really appreciate you coming on. If somebody's listening and they're like, hey, I really want to get in touch with Rick, what's the best way?
Go to our website at salesforceeurope.com, Salesforce Europe, and send me a note. It goes to me. You can also find me on LinkedIn or send me an email. It's my name, Rick Pizzoli at salesforceeurope.com. And Europe is our focus, and we really appreciate the collaboration with Predictable Revenue and you, Collin, and really look forward to future collaboration.
Right on. Well, Rick, thank you so much for coming on the show.